And we're going to be continuing in devil worship, the shocking facts. And I think we left off on page 215. And we're actually starting a section in here on Halloween, the sacrifices of the dead. And we're going to be continuing in here, and this is one of those festivals. This is one of those. Well, actually, they all are all of these modern holidays that we see today. They all have their origin in pagan antiquity, and what the church has done, what the Roman Church has done, what the people have done is they've tried to put a so-called Christian spin onto these things. They've taken these pagan holidays and these pagan rites and these different customs, and they've tried to turn it, and they've actually tried to turn these things into something that will be acceptable to Yahweh. And one thing to constantly remember about this is that simply cannot be done. Always keep in mind, always have to remember, always keep that in mind, that nothing that this pagan world does in honor of their gods will be acceptable to Yahweh as a form of worship for Him. In Deuteronomy 12, remember, I read this, I think, the last time I spoke, and we'll rehearse it again. But Deuteronomy 12, 29 to 32, it says, "When Yahweh your Father cuts off the nations from in front of you, and you displace them and live in their land, be careful." Now, a warning here, be careful that you are not ensnared into following them. You know, this ensnare, remember, that's a trick. Don't be deceived into thinking that this is something that would be acceptable to do. Don't be ensnared into following them by asking about their gods, saying, "How did these nations serve their gods? I will also do the same." You know, and then verse 31 says, "You must not worship Yahweh your Father in their way." You know, it doesn't get any clearer than that, man. It does not get any clearer. You must not worship Yahweh your Father in their way. For every abomination to Yahweh, which He hates, they have done to their gods. And we're seeing just the depraved thinking and just the pure evil that goes into these things. Which He hates, they have done to their gods. And why would Yahweh accept those things as something that, you know, why would He accept that as something honorable to Him? You know, He wouldn't, and He doesn't. And then He shows here they even burn their sons and daughters in the fires as sacrifices to their gods. And remember what we covered here a while back. You know, anytime that you indoctrinate, anytime that the people indoctrinate their children into God worship, you are passing your sons and daughters through the fire. That is one of the meanings of that. So, we just need to kind of keep that in mind. Remember, we need to remember those things. But one of the things about this sacrifices of the dead, one of the things that that marks this stuff with the Halloween is the augury, which is like the divination, or it's the art or practice of foretelling events by omens. And there were different things that they did. They would put, I think they would have the boys and the girls, they would actually put a couple of some type of nut into the fire, and then if they exploded and they went separate directions, that meant that there was a divorce in the future. But if they just sat there and burned evenly, that meant that there was going to be a peaceful marriage. They would bob for apples. Another thing that they would do would be to take and peel apples. They would peel an apple, and then they would take that apple peel, and they'd throw it over their shoulder, and they'd see what initial it landed in. And that would be the initial of the person that they were going to marry. I mean, it's foolishness. But these are the customs that follow, that are being followed. And they're being taught as something that is harmless to the children. But when you look in and what's behind it, of course, it's definitely not harmless. It's not harmless fun by any stretch of the imagination. It takes them away. I mean, it diverts them away from the laws of Yahweh. It diverts them from Yahweh. It separates them from Yahweh. Anybody who practices these things are separated from Yahweh. And they will remain separated from Yahweh until they repent, put these things away and come to the place that Yahweh has chosen to establish his name and sit at the feet of the great teacher that has been placed before us, the one that Yahweh has prophesied and established to be the greatest teacher in the world, to bring peace to this nation, to bring peace to the world, and to usher in the kingdom of Yahweh. And that's the only way that they're going to have their prayers heard. But continuing to read from that source there on page 213, let me see here. This augury. This augury, it was a divination or a practice of foretelling events. And that was actually, the person that practiced that augur was actually a priest. He was actually a priest of ancient Rome. What he did is, in doing these things, he was actually attempting to interpret the will of the gods by studying these different phenomenon. So, by studying those things, or by I think they show here, by studying the flight of the birds and what kind of sound they were making and how they were formed and what direction they were going and all kinds of stuff. But that's what that augury is. But Halloween here, this Halloween here on page 214 out of Astounding Facts from the Book of Holidays. It says, Halloween, in spite of the fact that it takes its name from a Christian festival, All Hallows or All Saints' Day, it comes from pagan times and has never taken on Christian significance. You notice there it has never taken on the significance that they claim. When you dug for apples or throw an apple paring over your shoulder to see what initial it makes on the floor, you are doing as the Romans did, honoring Pomona, the Roman goddess of orchards and especially of apple orchards. When you light a candle inside the jeering pumpkin face, or as it was in the days before that, they actually used turnips, hollowed out turnips, you are in a small way imitating the Celtic Druids in northern Britain. Described in the chapter on St. Patrick's Day, here it says, who lit a fire to scare away the winter and the evil spirits who are waiting to come rushing in when summer was over. On the top of page 215 here it says, on that night between October and November, the Druids kindled great fires on the hills as a barrier against the evil to come. It says, by burning wisps of plaited straw aloft on pitchforks, people tried to frighten off demons and witches. But just in case it didn't work, they also put on grotesque and terrifying costumes. For if you dressed in a horrible enough fashion and went trooping around with the spirits all night, they would think you were one of them and would do you no harm. Okay, this is the thinking behind this. Okay, this is where the persistent Halloween custom of dressing up and wearing masks originated. Among the children who come to the door on Halloween calling trick or treat, the most alarming costumes are still considered the best. Other northern peoples in Germanic and Scandinavian countries also lived in terror of the raging rout, as they called the evil spirits whom they believed to be led by the great god Odin. This god Odin. And Wikipedia shows here that this was a god, I think it was in Norse mythology. And Odin here, I didn't highlight it. Odin was generally accepted as the modern English form of this. He was a, let me see here. Wow, I can't find it now. But this Odin, he was associated with war, battle, victory, and death, but also of wisdom. It shows of shamanism, magic, poetry, philosophy, and the hunt. Odin has many sons. One of the most famous of his sons was the thunder god Thor. So this we see here, again this Odin is who they believed these spirits were, and it shows here that this god was I think he was very similar, or he was another name. The other name he was known by was Mercury. He was regarded as a psychopomp. And it shows here that a psychopomp means a guiding of the souls, or a guide to the souls. And that means they are creatures, some type of creature, a spirit, angel, or deity, who is responsible to escort the newly deceased souls from the earth to the afterlife. And that was supposedly their job. But it didn't stop there. It says that they, it shows here that they, let me see here. It says he was also, this psychopomp was also a mediator between the unconscious and conscious realms. It is symbolically personified in dreams as a wise man or woman, or sometimes a helpful animal. In many cultures, the shaman also fulfills this role, but this includes not only accompanying the soul of the dead, but also vice versa, to help at birth, to introduce the newborn child's soul to the world. And if you remember, part of the rituals and part of the part of the things that go on with the celebrating of birthdays is to appease the guardian spirit. Remember, to appease the guardian spirit that watches over that child. Well, you see now here how this even ties in here with Halloween. And all of these things all tie together. Continuing on here on page 215, it says, the night so being filled with supernatural powers, it was unusually possible for individuals to catch some premonitions of their own futures, especially among the Celts, as there was a custom, which still continues, to try to learn what the future holds, especially in matrimonial manners. Trick or treat means, of course, that the young Halloween visitors come to your door will play no tricks on you if you will treat them. In the earlier days of our American Halloweens, before tricks or treats became popular, the night of October 31st was a nervous time for house owners. It says, people who had things such as bird baths, gates, and lawn chairs learned to stow them away somewhere before dusk arrived, and the raging rout of children dressed as demons, ghosts, and witches started to lug around or to lug away and hide every movable thing they could find. So you see this tradition here, this tradition of Halloween, with the trick-or-treating, one of the things it's actually teaching, as we've mentioned before, is extortion. You either give me what I want, or I'm going to do something to your house. Or I'm going to do something to your lawn. I'm going to do something to you if you don't give me what I want. By law, by the definition even of the laws of the land, that's extortion. But the other thing it's teaching here, when you look at this, is teaching it's okay on this night to go about and trespass, to destroy property, to steal, to do whatever. Okay, that's the other thing that's being taught here. That mischief making is almost entirely over, and the evil spirits are turned into just a lot of friendly neighborhood children by the ancient Halloween magic of apples, nuts, and general merriment. We wish the Druids and the Romans and Norse would have found a simple way out, is what this particular source was saying here, which was from the facts from the Book of Holidays. But Pastor, he writes here, he says, as this book states, he said, we wish the Druids and the Romans and the Norse could have found as simple of a way out. When one studies the origins of the customs of the Christian religion, one comes to the firm conclusion that pagan worship was not banished from this world. The strongest and most popular ancient pagan customs were simply incorporated into the new paganism called Christianity. Okay, and that was, they just melted these things together. They just brought them in because, if you remember Constantine, Constantine, that was what he did. He just brought he brought those traditions into the church. As long as the proper homage was paid to the official God of Rome, then there wasn't a problem. And again, that goes all the way back to the ancient philosophies from Alexander that originated in Alexandria, Egypt. They always changed to meet the needs of the people. So, that's, we see again, this illustrated very, very clearly in these, in the modern holidays that the world celebrates today. Now, Pastor continues here. He says, today, this pagan rite is now known as a harmless diversion for the children, as they are sent out to magically secure material wealth by the magic words trick or treat. Okay, we find this information from Strange Stories and Amazing Facts and Reader's Digest Association, Plainville, New York, 1980. And it says, like Christmas and Easter, the festival of Halloween originated in a pagan celebration even though its name derives from a Christian festival on All Hallows Eve or All Saints Eve. It was introduced in the 7th century to commemorate all those saints and martyrs who had no special day to themselves and was held on the May 13th. But in the 8th century, All Hallows Day was moved to November 1st to counteract that pagan celebration held on that date. They say it was to counteract it, but it was actually to, they merged those celebrations in with it. October 31st, the eve of November 1st, was the last night of the year in the ancient Celtic calendar and was celebrated at the end of summer and its fruitfulness. It was a festival that the Celts of Northern Europe marked with bonfires to help the sun through the winter. The winter also called to mind the chill and blackness of the grave, so it was a time when ghosts would walk and supernatural spirits, warlocks, and witches would hold their revels. Only since the late 18th and early 19th century has Halloween developed into a festive time for children with costumes, lantern, and games. Before then, it was regarded as a night of fear, and wise men, respectful of hobgoblins and wandering demons, stayed indoors. It says this custom has survived today in many parts of the world as a children's masquerade. And then again, you see the children go from door to door in a ritual known as trick or treat. They usually carry a sack and threaten to play a trick on householders if they're not given a treat. The Halloween lantern, made from a hollowed out pumpkin or turnip with a candle in it, is a relic from the days when food offerings were made to the spirits of the dead. And then Pastor writes here, and he says, therefore do not allow anyone to try to tell you that this celebration is harmless. This celebration originated in honor of pagan gods, and it is most assuredly Satan worship or devil worship. Okay, the rites of Christmas, the rebirth of the sun god. It says at the beginning of winter, and you're going to notice a pattern here. You're going to notice a theme. The pattern, follows the cycle of the sun. Follows the cycle of the seasons. It follows the growth of vegetation. The fruitfulness of the crops, and then the death of vegetation as things dry out during the winter. You're going to notice this. That these things actually follow that cycle. And it says here at the bottom of page 217, at the beginning of winter, at the winter solstice, we find another religious festival that is innocently accepted without question by the vast majority of people in this same world. They do not know where this festival originated, nor who it is that is actually worshipped. Actually, there are some that do know where this festival originated. But again, they're deceived because they don't know what the scriptures say. They don't know that you cannot take these pagan traditions and honor our Father Yahweh with them. But yet that's what they do, and they rationalize and justify. Well, it's for the children. It's for the children. It's for the children. Everything you hear, these customs. It's for the children. It's not for the adults. It's for the children. It's for indoctrinating the children into this form of God worship. You take a look at what has taken place with the with the teachings of homosexuality and things along that line. It has taken place over it's taken place over several years, but if you notice what's taken place, it's the age at which this abomination is being introduced is getting earlier and earlier and earlier. They're forcing it to be taught in the schools now. Not only are they saying, well, it has to be acceptable in the high school now. Well, now you got to teach your kindergartners that it's okay, that it has to be accepted. So what are they doing? They're indoctrinating the children. They're getting these things into the minds of the children. So that they can be, so that they will be, so that it's firmly established in the mind of the child that, hey, this is okay and this is acceptable. And it's just, but that's the harm that comes from these harmless things here, these apparent harmless things, or what they say. It says, there are so many blatant lies which are told to the children which are simply not objected to. Why is this? The church is behind them. Therefore, to the people who follow the church, these lies must be okay. Yes, the customs and traditions each family participates in on December 25th of each year are condemned in your scriptures. They're condemned in the Bible. They are condemned as heathen, pagan practices. Remember, read Jeremiah 10, 1 through 5 to find out this condemnation, written very clearly. Is there any question in anybody's mind that Jeremiah chapter 10 is speaking of, is there any question that is speaking or that is not speaking of a Christmas tree? Jeremiah 10, right? 1 through 5, it says, hear the word of Yahweh, which speaks concerning you, O house of Israel. This is what Yahweh says. Do not learn the way or the religious practices of the heathen. Don't do this. Don't practice these things. Don't learn these things. And do not be deceived by the signs of heaven, though the heathen are deceived by them, using them to set their feast. For the religious customs of the peoples are vain. They're worthless. They're empty. There is nothing behind them. There's nothing beneficial behind them. For one cuts a tree out of the forest, the work of the hands of the workman with the axe. Okay? What's one of the big traditions that they do, that they show around Christmas time? Everybody loading up in the family station wagon or family truck, going out into the forest with an axe, hacking a tree out of the forest, tying it to the roof, and trying to get it back to the house in one piece and through the front door. And it shows they decorate it with silver and gold. They fasten it with nails and with hammers so that it will not move, so it won't topple over. Well, they bring it inside, they put it in a stand, they put it in a bucket, they put sand around it, they do whatever, so it doesn't move, so it doesn't topple over, it just sits there. And then they decorate it with silver and gold. They fasten it with nails so it doesn't move. And then it shows they are upright like a palm tree, but they cannot speak. They must be carried because they cannot go by themselves. Do not give them reverence. They cannot do evil, nor is it in them to do righteousness. There is nothing beneficial that comes from these practices. In fact, what they're doing when they deck it with silver and gold? One of the things that's being done when they deck it with silver and gold, and in modern days now they put all these bulbs on it, they put all these lights on it, they hang these ornaments on it, which all have different origins in and of themselves. But what are they doing? They're hiding something. You know what they're hiding? What takes place when they go out to the forest and they hack that tree out of the ground? What takes place with that tree? It starts to die because it's been cut off from its root system. That tree begins to die. And the more it sits, the longer it sits, the more dead it looks. Right? So what do? One of the things they do to hide that fact, what do? Oh, they put this shiny stuff on it. They put this tinsel. They put these balls on it. They put these lights, things on it to make it appear like this is a beautiful thing. But behind it, the base that what's being hidden is it's full of death. That tree is dying. That tree will never live. It has been cut off. And that's that's just the simple, that's just the simple fact of the matter. That tree has been cut off. That tree has no life left in it. The source of life has been cut off. Just as sin, dying you will die. As Eve was instructed, and the day that you eat it, and the day that you partake of this way of worship, dying you will die. That death process begins, and that's the same thing we see here with this Christmas tree. It begins to die, and it will not come back to life. We might be able to prolong its life a little bit by putting things into the water, but eventually it's gonna shrivel up and it's gonna die. Or it's going to catch fire and burn up and kill everybody in the house, which takes place how often during this season? A lot. It takes, over and over and over again. But we see this we see here the scriptures, and it's amazing when you show that to the people. They look at it and they think, "Wow, is that really talking about a Christmas tree?" Well, you tell me what it's talking about. What does it sound like to you? Well, that can't be right. They go into denial because everything that they've ever been taught is a lie. And when they're confronted with it with black and white, the confusion sets in. Now they're trying to get that straightened up, and the only thing they can think of is, well, that must be translated wrong, or that can't be what that means, because surely the preacher isn't going to lie. Surely the whole world can't be wrong, can they? But you see the things that are behind it. We know Yahweh called us. We believe what's written in Revelation 12:9 that says Satan has the whole world deceived. And we can see, we see the depth of this deception. And it says, yes, Christmas is a pagan custom and the worship of demons. It is Satan or devil worship. But this same ancient pagan holiday is now innocently accepted by the majority of this deceived world because the big lie has been proclaimed that this is the Savior's birthday. Okay, and boy, they can't pass that one up. That would be an abomination to pass up the Savior's birthday. But this is the Savior's birthday. The lie of the December 25th birth is only a cover-up to conceal the fact that this is the birthday, that this birthday is actually of the birthday of the pagan sun god. From the Great Events of Bible Times by John Ferguson, it shows here. It says, the birth of Jesus, the event that ultimately was to change the face of the world through the Christian religion, is shrouded in mystery. Although the traditional events relating to Jesus' birth are well known to Christians, it is not possible to be certain about its exact time or the circumstances surrounding it. Now, if it was going to be something of so important, if it was going to be so important, don't you think Yahweh would have mentioned in the scriptures, remember the birth of my son on this day? He tells us to remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. The seventh day of the week, he tells us to remember that, to keep it in our minds and to celebrate that and to keep that as a sign of the perpetual covenant, right? From generation to generation for all generations. What about the feast days? Yahweh is very specific about when the feast days are to be held. How do we find the feast days? How do we figure out when they're going to be? Well, he tells us. First, look for the new moon of green ears. And then you're to count so many days from that new moon. And then you're to look for the seventh moon. You're to look for the seventh moon. And it's very clear. Yahweh is very specific. He doesn't leave it up to us. Well, you guys go ahead and figure it out. He doesn't do that. But on strict historical evidence, it has been said that there is no certainty as to what actually happened here. It says some of the problems are as follows. Mark, probably the oldest gospel, John, probably the latest, and Paul said nothing about Jesus' birth. There is no early tradition of the date of Jesus' birth, and no widely celebrated festival documented before the 4th century. Before the 4th century, there was nothing documented. You know what years encompass the 4th century? It's the 300s. Can you think of any significant events that might have taken place in the 300s CE? Praise Yahweh, yeah. It says early in the 3rd century, Clement of Alexandria records a tradition that Jesus was born on May 20th. The first use of December 25th as Christmas Day dates from Rome in the year 336. To the pagan Romans, this was the birthday of the unconquered sun. The Emperor Constantine's family had worshipped the sun. His visions of the cross came to him from the sun. it was easy to transfer the festival to the Son of Righteousness. Now, instead, look how they spelled the word son there. It's S-U-N. Under St. Peter's in Rome, Jesus was pictured driving the chariot of the sun through the sky. Why? Why would the Savior be pictured driving a chariot through the sky? Makes no sense. Well, and it's just not this article here. It says we find this corroborating information from the Zondervan Pictorial Bible Dictionary in 1967 from pages 162 to 163. Remember, 2 or more witnesses. Well, look, here's the second witness here that ties right into this. It says Christmas, the anniversary of the birth of Christ and its observance, celebrated by most Protestants and by Roman Catholics on December 25th. And then it shows by Eastern Orthodox churches on January 6th and by the Armenian Church on January 19th. The first mention of its observance on December 25th is in the time of Constantine, about 325 A.D. Same time as the Council of Nicaea. It says, and remember what else took place with the Council of Nicaea. Remember, that was when the name Jesus Christ was actually, or the God Jesus Christ was actually created from the creation of 2 different gods, right? Was it Zeus and Krishna? It says the date of the birth of Christ is not known. The word Christmas is formed with Christ plus Mass, meaning the Mass of religious service in commemoration of the birth of Christ. Whether the early Christians thought of or observed Christmas is not clear. Once introduced, the observance spread throughout Christendom. Some Christian bodies disapproved of the festival. Many customs of pagan origin have become part of Christmas, that is the Christmas tree, but most of these no longer have a heathen connotation but have acquired a Christian meaning. Okay? So they don't mean what they used to, but now they have all these Christian meanings. Well, just go back to what the law says. Remember, go back to what Deuteronomy chapter 12 says. Deuteronomy 12, 29 to 32. It can't be done. That's not something that can be done. It's not something that will be acceptable by Yahweh. Then we see from 2,201 fascinating facts, we learn the origin of all Christmas tree ornaments which hang from the limbs of every Christmas tree. And it says Christmas tree ornaments date back to the time of the Romans during the Saturnalia, which coincided roughly with our Christmas holiday. The Romans hung these little masks of Bacchus on pine trees. Virgil refers to these dangling ornaments as oscilla and describes how during the December season evergreens were laden with them. And then in Collier's Encyclopedia, we find this information about the Bacchanalia festival in honor of the god Bacchus. It says, Bacchanalia, it says the Roman name for the festival of Bacchus, and you see in parentheses there, Dionysus. Now remember, these gods had, depending on what region that you were in or what country you were from, the same god just went by different names, but it was the same god. And it says, but the festivals of Bacchus or Dionysus, but especially used to designate certain rites imported from Etruria and alleged to include gross immoralities and even murders. Gross immoralities and even murders. The Bacchanalia were also prohibited by decree. It says the Bacchanalia were prohibited by decree of the Roman Senate in 186 BC. But it says, I'll see also Dionysus here. It says the following information about Dionysus is from the International Standard Encyclopedia. It says this dying, resurrected deity may be assigned to the same class as with Adonis, that is the Semitic Tammuz, and Attis, and the goddess of Persephone as well, whose yearly death and resurrection explained the vegetation cycle of winter and spring. So remember, we talked about earlier in class, it all centers around this vegetation cycle, the cycle of things, growing in the spring and dying off in the winter. It says, yet unlike others, as the god of the vine, on top of page 220 here, as the god of the vine, Bacchus, he was thought to communicate his power to his devotees through the intoxicating influence of wine. Okay, so this is how this god communicated to the devotees, through the intoxicating influence of wine. So when people became intoxicated, that's how the god connected with them and, I guess, talked to them. Stimulating them into orgiastic excesses, wild dancing and music, and every form of ecstatic revelry. It is from pagan regeneration that we find information about gross immoralities and murders which involved ceremonies of a pine tree. However, the ceremony of Sibyl and Attis was observed during the time of the vernal equinox, not during the winter solstice like the Saturnalia. And it shows here, it says, the prelude to the annual festival began on the Ides of March, on the second festival day, which was designated in the calendar. And it mentions here, it talks about the guild or tree bearers were in charge of the ceremony. It was the duty of the tree bearers to cut down a pine tree in the woods and bear it with due prompt to the temple of Sibyl. Now, Sibyl, the Sibyl, as we're gonna find as we get further into this, but Sibyl in Rome, she went by another name in Rome, and she went by the name of Magna Mater. Magna Mater in Rome, which roughly translates to the Great Mother. So the temple of Sibyl in Rome was actually the temple of the Great Mother. The perennial pine was a natural embodiment of Attis, that was the spirit of vegetation. According to legend, it was under a pine tree that he had mutilated himself and died. And you're going to see a little bit about this mutilation, about some of this mutilation that takes place over here as it continues on here. It was called the Day of Blood, but we'll see how that goes here in just a second. But this god here was seen to have that he mutilated himself and died. He had himself been transmuted into a pine tree and carried in this form into the cave of Sibyl, where the goddess mourned her dead lover. Hence, the pine tree borne by the Dendrophi, which was the tree bearers, into the temple of Sibyl was regarded as the corpse of Attis, of the dead Attis, and treated with divine honors. It was swathed with wool, as the body of this individual had been. Its branches were hung with garlands of violets, the flowers that sprang from his blood. It was from the middle of the stem was suspended an image of a young man who was doubtless Attis himself. So you can see they're attributing this, they're treating this pine tree. This pine tree, they're actually treating this pine tree as a god. Okay? It says, the following day was one of fasting, when the devotees of Attis mourned their god. It was a particular fast, however, Jerome called it. It was a gluttonous abstinence when men ate pheasants in order not to contaminate cereals. Okay? So it was a fast, but basically it says that it was a gluttonous abstinence, so they ate pheasant. I mean, they ate meat. They didn't eat grain. They didn't eat anything that came from the ground. Meats in general were allowed, but fruits and vegetables were forbidden. This prohibition extended to wine also. The vegetable abstinence was a natural one here, it shows. It says, as the cutting down of the pine tree symbolized that the god of the vegetation was dead, so the vegetable world shared in the defunct conditions of the god. To partake of the vegetables and cereals at such a season would be to violate the bruised and broken body of a god. It says this fast probably began with the 15th of March, and it had its influence as a physical preparation for the excessive emotionalism of the rites which marked the climax of the festival. Okay, and that's, and Pastor has always pointed out, one thing Pastor has always pointed out about these pagan holidays, about the holidays in the world, is that they play on the emotions of man. They play on mankind's emotions. They can be they target emotions. And they play on that because emotions, if we're not careful, they're very, very powerful. And this is, as we're going to see here, this is what we're going to see here what took place on the 24th of March here. The day was called, as part of this festival here, it was called significantly enough the Day of Blood. And it was at this time the great mother of the gods inspired her devotees with a frenzy surpassing that which the followers of Dionysus knew. It was madness. Now get this, get what was taking place, and I want you to take a look and see if you see any parallels, or if you can see anything that would actually tie into things that go on today. But it was madness induced not by wine, but by the din of crashing music. The din of crashing music. The dizzy whirling of the dance. And the sight of blood. The music which accompanied these rites was wild and barbaric, made by clashing cymbals, blatant horns, shrilling flutes, and rolling drums. Now think of just think of of what takes place, when people go out to these nightclubs and things like this. What are they accompanied by? What do they have out there? They've got this maddening music, right? This maddening music, and then it was maddening. It says it was a maddening music, noisy and savage. To the accompaniment of these barbaric strains, a dance was staged. With wagging heads and streaming hair, the devotees of the Great Mother whirled their bodies around and around in a dizzying dance, shouting and singing as they gyrated. To me, that paints the picture of a nightclub. That's just what comes to mind. Now, along with that, as they get whipped into this frenzy, as they get going here, these emotions take over. And then they start slashing their arms with knives or gashing their bodies. The worshipers sprinkled their own blood over the sacred tree that was Attis. This ghastly ritual formed a part of the mourning of the dead Attis. When the Great Mother saw the freely flowing blood of her worshipers, she could not doubt that they shared in her sorrow. The blood may have well been intended also to appease the manes of the dead Attis, or to strengthen him for his resurrection. To imitate Sybil in her grief, and to call Attis back to life were the purposes of this bloody rite. It says, but the devotees of the Great Mother did not start with the shedding of blood merely. Keyed up to the highest pitch of religious excitement, the emotions, they followed the example of Attis and emasculated themselves. With this final act of self-sacrifice and consecration, the dies sanguinis was crowned, and the devotee became one of the Gale, a eunuch priest of the Asian goddess. Held as it usually was, though not invariably at the time of the vernal equinox, this dies sanguinis, the resurrection of vegetation and of the god of vegetation, naturally suggested the regeneration of the individual. Following the Day of Blood brought delirium joy. The day following the Day of Blood brought a delirium of joy to replace the delirium of sorrow. Dead Attis had been buried, and around his grave his devotees had mourned his death long into the night. Toward the morning, however, a great light appeared in the darkness, and the resurrection of the god was announced. It says, when they are satisfied with their fictitious grief, a light is brought in, and the priest, having anointed their lips, whispers, "Be of good cheer, you of the mystery. Your God is saved. For us also there shall be salvation from ills." Then joy took the place of sorrow, for the resurrection of the God brought with it the assurance of salvation for men, and this chiefly included the promise of a happy immortality. So you can kind of see here with some of these words and the way that, especially here when we got toward this last part here on page 222, where it's talking about this great light appeared in the darkness and the resurrection of the God was announced. You can see the ties with that with the Sunday resurrection lie of Easter. Because this is really you can see how it all kind of ties in with that. But it is from the International Standard Bible Encyclopedia that we find the status of those who had emasculated themselves. They were now homosexual cult prostitutes whose earnings supported his temple. And then this is it shows the male cult prostitutes served the goddess Ishtar at the temple in Iraq, were called men whose manhood Ishtar has changed into womanhood. Okay, so for 2,000 years of 2,201 fascinating facts, we find that the giving of Christmas presents originated with the good luck, the god of fortune gifts, which were given at the pagan festival of the Roman Saturnalia. So now we see here the Roman Saturnalia here now. Let's see here. Okay, it says the practice of exchanging presents at Christmas originated with the Romans. Every December, the Romans celebrated a holiday called the Saturnalia. During this time, the people gave each other good luck presents of fruit, sweets, pastry, or gold. When the Christians began to celebrate their own holiday at this time of year, they simply took over the tradition. It says this pagan holiday, just like every other pagan holiday, called for the initiation of innocent children into God worship. And this is what Pastor is explaining here. It says, during the Christmas season, it seems to be the prevailing idea that this holiday is for the children. So for the children, friends and family actually bow down before this tree god and place gifts at its feet. You think about it, what they're doing. They get the presents, they wrap them up. What do? They got to get down on all fours and they got to shove them underneath the tree. Well, they don't realize that act is they're bowing down before this tree god and they're placing gifts at the feet of this god. And then on December 25th, the birthday of this pagan sun god, the same initiated children, what do? Well, they crawl down under there, they go under there, and they go get them. So they're receiving these gifts from this god. It says, but not only fruits and sweets and pastry or gold were considered to be good luck gifts, and it shows here, but there's a phallic symbol here that was considered to be so-called good luck as well. And a lot of times that this was, they had the stone, it says here, the stone phallus was set above the gates of the city of many ancient Roman towns as a protection against bad luck. It says under this object here, appeared the inscription, happiness dwells here. It says the Romans often hung these small symbols like this around children's necks as a protection against the evil eye. And I had to look up this evil eye, and it was really kind of hard to find a whole lot about it. But it says here, this evil eye, it says the evil eye is a curse believed to be cast by a malevolent glare, usually given to a person when they are unaware. Many cultures believe that receiving the evil eye will cause misfortune or injury. Talismans created to protect against the evil eye are also frequently called evil eyes. And there's a whole bunch of different things that they use to, that people have used to actually, turn these, to so-called, turn this bad luck away. But the bottom line to remember about this whole thing is what? A curse causeless will not come. The whole thing to remember is that the whole reason that these curses are coming upon the people, the whole reason that there's sickness, the whole reason there's disease, the whole reason that there's war and there's we see all of these things is because that the laws of Yahweh have been rejected and that iniquity has been taught. So instead of addressing the problem, they've turned to these magic talismans to try to protect them from that. And of course, we know those don't work at all. But it shows here the modern celebration of Christmas and the Roman New Year are based upon the same religious concept of ancient paganism, securing material wealth from the gods and goddesses through the process understood as demonology and witchcraft and ancient paganism, but known as harmless diversions for children. At Christmas, during the winter solstice, the mother goddess, who was fertilized by her husband/son at the previous vernal equinox, gave birth to her son/husband, which is, and this is what the initiated children in the world are celebrating when they celebrate these things. They don't realize it, they don't understand it, but this is what the symbolism is behind it. The rites of Valentine's Day, purification from childbirth. Okay. 40 days after the birth of the sun god at the winter solstice, the great fertility mother was purified from childbirth by magic rites of witchcraft. These children and the children in this world today, however, are encouraged to celebrate Valentine's Day by parents, schools, and churches. They're actually being taught to fling themselves at the first person of the opposite sex who is the least bit interested in them. It says children in kindergarten are often taught this custom, and by the time these same children reach junior high school, the vast majority of them have already sacrificed their virginity to the gods. Valentine's Day is nothing but the glorification of unlawful sexual relations and nothing else, and that's all it is. The origin of this harmless diversion that the initiated children in this depraved world are now celebrating is an ancient fertility ritual in which the sex goddess mother has become ritually purified from childbirth so she could begin again to practice sexual relations at the coming vernal equinox. And if you remember I had, come on, cooperate with me here, technology. All right, I'm going to go ahead and this kind of lays things out a little bit. There we go. Okay. It kind of what that kind of does, that kind of lays out that whole cycle of sun worship. And so you can see there at the very top there, it talks about the winter solstice. And that winter solstice there shows that that is the birth of the sun god, that is the birth of the sun god. And that's also the time, when, as we're experiencing now, when the days are starting to get longer again. If you remember from the time of the autumn equinox, actually it's from the summer solstice. From the summer solstice all the way to the winter solstice, the days begin to get shorter and shorter and shorter and shorter. Okay, well, from the winter solstice down to the summer solstice now, we see where the days get longer and longer. And that pagan man had actually tied that into the regeneration and to the rebirth of this sun god. So you can see there at the top there it says, the birth of the sun god, and then this next one over here, it shows that 40 days after the birth of that sun god, is the goddess, the mother goddess, is once again ritually clean or pure for sexual relations. And when you go, when you look at when, I think it was from January 6th to February 14th or 15th, February, you got 40 days. You got 40 days between the birth of the sun god and Valentine's Day. That marks that 40th day. Okay? So, and then at the time of the equinox, then you see where the mother goddess, and that's at this point here, where you have equal periods of daylight and of day and night. That at that point you see where the mother goddess is once again is fertilized by her husband/son, and at that point you have the equal. At that point, you have the equal periods of day and night again. So this is where we are here. The coming vernal equinox here. It shows that the origin of this harmless diversion, talking about Valentine's Day, that the initiated children in this depraved world are now celebrating is an ancient fertility ritual. And under pagan festivals here, it says the pagan festivals, the Roman festivals were a mixture of public holiday and religious ritual. One of the oldest was a fertility rite called the Limmuwdyah, which was celebrated every year on February 15th. The celebrations began with the ritual sacrifice of goats and a dog, at the Limmuwdyah cave on Rome's chief hill, the Palatine. And I always wondered why Limmuwdyah. Why Limmuwdyah? Well, of course, the Limmuwdyah or Limmuwdyah, this hill in Palatine, it shows here that there was a cave. There was supposedly a cave there on that chief hill in Palatine in which Romulus and Remus, the legendary founders of Rome, were reputedly suckled by a she-wolf. Okay, in other words, if you remember right, the Romulus and Remus were supposedly, abandoned in a cave, and this adult mama wolf came in and raised them. I guess I don't know, it was something like that. But that's why Romulus and Remus, and that's where this Limmuwdyah, this is where this comes from. And I didn't know that this cave was actually on the chief hill of Palatine. That's one of the 7 hills of Rome. That's one of the 7 hills that Rome was founded on. And then part of this festival is that 2 youths, naked except for leather girdles, were smeared with the blood from the sacrifices and then ran around the Palatine hill carrying thongs cut from the goat skins. By striking any woman they passed with the thongs, the runners were thought to confer the gift of fertility. This particular ceremony was known as Februara, which means purification, and it is from that name that the second month of the year is derived. Okay? So, again now, we see the whole deceived pagan world worship the gods and goddesses, which centered around the worship of a mother, son, husband. And that's this whole cycle here that you see. It all centers around that. Everything centers around that. Around that vernal equinox there, you see where the mother goddess was fertilized by the sun god, who has now become the father, and then you have those equal periods of day and night. Then at the time of the summer solstice, the husband/son god is killed. The husband/son god is killed. Can't remember if it was by the mother goddess or not, but she had him killed. So it was either by her hand directly or she hired somebody to do it. The sun god, which has become the father, of course, is now dead. And from this point on, the days begin to get shorter and the nights start to become longer. Then around the time of the autumn equinox is when you see this great mother, this mother goddess now mourns for the death of the father, and longs for the rebirth of the son. And so here, at this point, you have the equal periods of day and night, and then you get into the winter solstice again with the rebirth of the sun, and then you've gone complete circle. You've gone complete cycle at this point. But continuing on here on the bottom of page 224, it says, the whole deceived pagan world worshiped the gods and goddesses which centered around this worship of a mother, husband, son. It was fertility of the mother, husband, son, husband, which brought fertility upon the earth, and that was what they believed. It says, ancient Babylonians worshiped the mother Semiramis and her husband, son, Nimrod or Ninus. Ishtar and Tammuz was venerated by the Canaanites. The Egyptians paid homage to the mother Isis and her husband's son Osiris. And then in India, the couple was Isis and Iswara. In Asia, Cybele and Dios. And pagan Rome, Fortuna and Jupiter Pure, or Jupiter the boy, were adored. The Greeks, Chinese, and Japanese, yes, the whole deceived world worshiped the great mother who married her own son in order to perpetuate the fertility of that world. Okay, and that's this whole cycle here that you see. That's that whole, that kind of in a nutshell is the whole cycle. And these, the holidays, the pagan holidays, they all tie in with the different festivals, different traditions come from those, and those have been kind of mixed in with Christianity now. So, I mean, it's all the same. In reality, what it is, it's all the same. It's the same devil worship. It's just under a new name, is all it is. As I think Pastor said, if it looks like a duck, walks like a duck, sounds like a duck, it's probably a duck.